Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Jeremy Hartman. Coach Hartman is a strength and conditioning coach for Center Grove Community School. He is an award-winning teacher and coach and prides himself on running a program through effective communication and student engagement. Coach Hartman is the only coach in USA Powerlifting to have directly produced 3 World Powerlifting team members and 3 bench-only World team members in the same calendar year. Hartman's powerlifting athletes have set 8 world records and more than 40 U.S. American records. He has won at least 1 state championship at all 3 of his high school programs where he oversaw the strength and training of various sports. Coach Hartman is a motivational speaker along with presenter, and Hartman was named the 2023 Powerlifting Coach of the Year by USA Powerlifting. He is a 6-time national champion powerlifter and earned a gold medal in the deadlift at the 2008 IPF World Championships. Coach Hartman has a Bachelor's of Science degree from Bowling Green in physical education. So welcome to the show, Coach.
All right, thanks for having me so much. Well, excited to be here, man.
I'm sure some of those awards that I read in there that some of your lifters have done have changed. I've been keeping up with you on Instagram, and it looks like your guys are killing it.
Yeah, we just set a couple more American records. I just had one of my females at the 2024 USA Powerlifting Raw Nationals. She just set the all-time bench press American record. She bench pressed right around 288 pounds. She weighed about 215 pounds. So that was another American record for us. And then we've had a few more. So we're it's getting close to like 60 plus right now, honestly. It's kind of getting crazy.
Everybody's needing you to coach them. You're definitely making a difference, and you're creating some incredible lifters.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for recognizing that. We're doing a good job here. I'm blessed to have some great people around me now.
Now, some of these bench pressers, we'll take it back to the high school level. Some of these bench pressers, from what I was reading, and lifters altogether, not necessarily just bench pressers, but they started with you and they knew very, very little about the weight room. You've taken them from the bare bones of this is a bar to the world stage. What kind of process is that?
It's a long one, that's for sure. No, I was a high school strength conditioning coach, and I was they recruited me to come to a high school to build up the program. They had very poor athletics where I was going to, and part of it was the morale. When I first walked in the athletic meeting, a lot of the coaches were just, hey, this is what we have, or hey, this is what we're working with. I'm looking around like, you guys, you got kids, you got programs, you can build something up here. So in addition to working with all the sports, I said, I'm going to create a lifting team for the kids that want to, take this more serious, because I was trying to build up the strength conditioning program. And it was just one of those like, hey, I'm going to show you we can win with these kids, guys. We can boost up this morale. So I kind of put on my own shoulders to do that. And so, along with building up the athletic programs, which we were doing a really good job of, I had the lifting team, which was also gaining some recognition. And I made it for the kids that were wanting to come in and do extra. They were working hard in the weights class that I was teaching. They were coming in extra for after school. If I had it open on Saturdays, they were showing up for that when I told them extra stuff. So this is my way of helping the athletic program and helping those kids and really just bringing promotion to it, because I was trying to create, a school-wide strength conditioning program. But yeah, those kids came in as nothing more than tennis athletes, volleyball athletes, football players, wrestlers. That's what they first came in. They didn't. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about that. Shelby, who I just mentioned, was just set the American record in the bench press. I've had her for over 10 years. She came in as a volleyball athlete, lost, said she had to report to the weight room for training. We were working out with the bar. She didn't know how much the bars weighed in there. And it was definitely a big, long process all the way through. But yeah, most of my athletes were homegrown, especially when I first started this.
Now, I hear this all the time. It's posted all the time. We're coaching athletes, not powerlifters. Mm-hmm. I get that. Strength does play a huge part in it. And I'm sure you have a dividing line on what's what. How do you separate the powerlifting mind you have to the athletic training mind you have?
Yeah, you're working with a variety of different sports. A big thing is the buy-in with the kids. I think that's huge, because you have fitness and strength conditioning that's so out there, because the kids nowadays, they have pitching coaches, they have hitting coaches, they have this person telling them this, they have their uncle who benched 315 back in 1989 who was telling them they should be doing this stuff. They'll read some stuff. Obviously, there's so much stuff on the internet now. So it's getting through all that and getting that going. So what I had to do was, in the school system for the sports, is I had to tell them that we are creating a total athlete strength conditioning program. This is athletic development. We're not going to do sports specific where we're doing this for this and this for this, because it just doesn't work. And I've seen other schools do that, and they all failed. And the big thing about Center Grove, where I was most at recently, is we had that in our thing that we were supporting a school-wide strength conditioning program. Now, within that program, that's how we made stuff. We divide a little bit with our in-season, kind of off-season athletes. When kids had events coming up, The day before, day after, when coaches would come down and say, hey, this is a big meet for us. Hey, we got a tough one this weekend. If we could have the kids a little bit rested. And I would just talk to those kids in my class. So we had a master program. And inside that, we individualized a little bit and kind of, because you had football players mixed in with volleyball players and, baseball players had to play double headers or makeup games. So we just make announcements, communicate as best we could with those kids that were involved with that. And that's how we build it up. But you're trying to get all the kids stronger. The kids come in, they're very weak athletes coming into the program. And you have to have a base level strength. I don't care if you start talking about speed and agility and everything else out there. You have to have a base level of strength before any of that really takes place. And if you look at some of my strongest athletes, they were most athletic ones. They're the ones that did very well. They're the ones that were most injury, proof on there. Some of the other ones that weren't, they were the ones that were most injury prone. I'm a big believer in what Louis Simmons says: weak things break. And I mean, I had some of my strongest cross country runners. We never had a Division I athlete. He was my strongest cross country runner ever, and he could squat the football team. So how I divided that up is we had a lot of our lifts during the school day. So we did our back squats, which took a long time to develop. I taught them a little bit of Olympic lifts, but inside that, we're doing dips, we're doing pull-ups, dumbbell work, abdominal work, just simple, basic fundamentals. What I was trying to sell the program on. Now, what I did was separate that. Is we would have my lifters come in, they would hit their normal classroom routine, and they would come in for extra work that I would have them perform. And then Friday or Saturday was kind of like our big deadlift day. So I deadlift a lot of my power lifters, where I focus more on the Olympic lifts and some simple deadlift variations for my athletes that were actually in the weights class.
By just creating a base, yeah, everything can be built off that, and the coach can use it quickly. So yeah, the dips, the pull-ups, all those things seem to have huge carryover on high school athletes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we had a swim program that hadn't won a sectional title since the 1980s. And I had a coach come in. We started a youth program for lifting for our swim program. And he got the high school kids involved and even brought them extra in during the season. And we were, 4 years later, we were state runner-ups. And the only team that beat us was the number one team in the entire nation. And it became from our strength program. Our swimmers were some of our strongest. We actually had a youth, our middle school program, all the way through high school for lifting, for swimming. And that took some buy-in because the parents were like, hey, we're paying for swimming lessons, not weight room lessons. And it took us a good 4 years to turn that entire program around. And lo and behold, we're second in the state, right behind the number one team in the nation.
That's incredible. And I think there's some of those sports that do not look at strength and conditioning like other sports. I guess maybe that's why football has drove the locker room or the weight room for so long. Is the myth that basketball carries and the myth that baseball carries that your guys are going to get too big or too bulky. Swimming's probably the same way in a lot of regards. So overcoming some of those myths and putting champions on the field or pool, whatever the case may be, it definitely breaks down some barriers.
Yeah. Like the swimming one, we'll go back to that one. We had a lot of the whole rubber band, external rotations, rotator cuff stuff. We stopped doing all that because our kids actually got stronger in the correct spots. We did other back work, don't get me wrong. Kids were rowing, they were doing pull-ups, chin-ups, a lot of variations, rear delt work. And we had a lot of local swim clubs like, man, what are you guys doing differently? And they're all warming up with bands. And he goes, our strength coach stopped doing that. He goes, if you look at our kids are strong and stable. And he was talking to one coach. My coach forgot that we had shoulder problems because they just went away. And he's talking to one coach down the road, had a good program. He goes, we got 6 kids out with shoulders. How are you doing with everything? And my coach is like, we haven't had a problem in over like a year, really. He goes, you're not doing all this, pool deck work and everything else. He goes, no. He goes, I quit doing that. He goes, our strength coach kind of takes care of it. And he goes, I forgot we used to have problems. We don't anymore.
That's an incredible testament to the job that you're doing and the ideas that you brought forward, because I'm sure that was a hard one to break. The swim coach just felt like that had to probably happen for a while to prevent injuries when actually strength may have been the root cause.
Yep, exactly. And when I had a good young swim coach that came in. Him and I sat down and talked a lot when he first came up. And I asked him what colleges that he really looked up to, because I saw a lot of Indiana University swimming stuff. So I contacted a lot of the local colleges and asked them for their programs and just their philosophy. And when I sat down with that swim coach to get him to buy in, I put all that on his desk for him. Him and I sat and talked about it. And he goes, I'm sold. He goes, let's do it. He goes, this is phenomenal stuff. He goes, you went and contacted all these people? I'm like, yeah, I got their emails. Here's what they do. Here's their program. And he goes, okay. He goes, I used to think benching was wrong for that. I used to think this would hurt my kids' shoulders. He goes, I didn't realize Indiana University was doing this, or Ohio State University swim program, or I even contacted the University of Pittsburgh because he had a connection out there. And I showed him all the stuff, what they were doing. And he bought in. He said, okay, let's do this, man. And he goes, I got your back. And he was a big seller for me because he sold that to the parents. He sold that to the community of the younger kids. And that's how we built up the strength program and got it, really fast forwarded.
You said something in there, and I think it's common amongst a lot of really good strength coaches, and maybe it gets taken for granted. But the research you did is what sold it. You could have went in there and argued with him, and you could have went in there and told him this is going to work. But by putting in the extra work, you got extra buy-in from him, and he was willing to go the extra mile when I'm sure he was facing some adversity with parents to back you up. And then now they have a program they can be proud of.
Yep. I had to say, it's funny. I just had a talk with my former cross country coach. He's at Shrine University in Northern Indiana. And he was a high school guy. And again, we had people that hadn't qualified for state, the guys team, since he was another one since I believe the 90s, early 2000s. And then we really built that up. That was when I was at Fort Wayne Carroll High School. And we built that up into where the guys had actually, I think they finished top 5 in the state. The girls had finished top 5 in the state. And again, he was a big sell on that. And I talked to him about some of the college stuff that we were doing and what we were doing on that part. He still talks to me this day. It's been over 15 years about his strength program now. And he moved on to the college setting. And he knows how important it was and how much we reduced injuries with everything that we did. And it took him a little bit buy-in. He gave me some guys at first for about 6 months. And then he gave me some more guys. And within a year, we had the whole teams training back and forth. And that coach is a great friend of mine today that still comes and talks to me, and we bounce ideas off each other.
I know we're talking about swimming, but your background from high school going into college, and then I think you made the switch listening to some things you talked about, was wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah.
So bringing the wrestling strength and conditioning into the high school level when a lot of that is so condition-based, how were you able to create a model to create stronger wrestlers as opposed to just more conditioned wrestlers?
Yeah, that was a tough sell because you look at the wrestlers, a lot of them want to do circuit training, a lot of them want to do, keep the volume up, keep the high intensity up, going with this. They're getting enough of that in the practice room during the day. They're getting so much conditioning. Why are you going to do it even more? So when I first started, it was a tough sale with the wrestling coach, but his wrestling program had been down for a little bit. So he was willing to try some stuff. So he let me really build a program up at Fort Wayne Carroll High School. That was my first one. And then when I came down to Franklin, I had a coach who he'd been a little bit more involved with the strength side. And he was more like kind of wanting somebody to kind of take this over because he was trying some of it. But, he's a sport coach with everything. But he was a good guy. I worked with him for many years. And then in, 2014, again, after we're about almost 3 years of being there, we ended up being state champions in wrestling. And there's only one division in Indiana. There's not 1, 2, or 3. There's division. There's just one division. So we ended up winning the team state title. And Coach looked, all of our guys that were state placers, state champions that year, even state qualifiers, they were actually all on our all-time record board for all athletes. All the guys were. It was funny when Coach looked at that, like that was his big sale that year. I'm like, look at everybody who broke records. They were your state placers, your state champions. And he goes, you don't have to tell me, man. He goes, I'm sold on this. Let's do that. And when I went from Franklin over to Center Grove, we ended up being state runners up twice and finished top 5 in the state after several years of doing that. We had a great strength and conditioning program over there. And again, we just brought that in and talked to the guys about you're getting enough conditioning on this side. You're doing enough of these circuits over here. We need strength training over here. You're doing enough of this. And Kyle Snyder was a big one. If you look at him, one of the most decorated wrestlers of all time in the United States, Kyle gave some speeches about that and talked. He goes, I'm already doing conditioning in the wrestling room. I'm already doing this other stuff. Why would I want to come in and keep doing this? He goes, I want to come into the wrestling room and build strength. So I use him as an example, something I still use today. I pass on some of his training stuff or post it on my stories or send it to some of my kid wrestlers to get them to buy in how important that is. And, that's how we've been very successful with a team state championship and 2 runners up at 2 different schools now.
In wrestling, a lot of the things that's needed the most are overlooked. What are some things that you see that are missing from a lot of programs that they could add in to have their wrestlers be stronger and better on the mat?
Yeah, if you're talking from the high school setting, you got to get those kids' workouts done during the day. I made sure that every school I was at, when I created the strength conditioning program, we had a weight training class that was just for athletes only. So that way those kids could come in every day. There was no chasing them after school or trying to hunt them down or, whatever. They had to report to class no matter how they're feeling. So they got their strength training in during the day. I built a good relationship with that coach where he trusted me that we were doing the stuff in there right. So that way those kids were training year round. Now during the wrestling season, those kids are obviously cutting weight towards the end. So I do a lot of main lifts Mondays and Tuesdays because usually Thursdays or Friday and Saturday was their tournament time. And that's when they were really cutting weight and, had to lighten up their load and everything on there. So I would really bring them up really hard at the beginning of the week, during the wrestling season, and then afterwards. And I just talked to the kids. Like, I had some kids that were going to be state qualifiers, state placers, state champions. I said, hey, are we peaking for sectionals here? Or am I peaking you for state? And they're like, well, we're trying to peak for state. I said, well, we're going to keep our training up all the way through. Let those other kids rest. I'm going to treat you right, but we're peaking for state, so we're not going to take the next 3 weeks off. We're still going to be training all the way through. And my kids always did better at state. I had one kid that stuck with me all the way through. He's a state champ. He's wrestling now at the Citadel Division I. And I was training him heavy. We were hitting heavy singles before the state championship meet. And the mental side is what people don't realize. Because he got done mentally. He goes, Coach, he goes, man, I squat a little bit of a PR. Man, I benched a 5-pound PR. He goes, this is the best I've ever felt. And he went in there and just dominated everybody, including avenging his one loss, beat the kid by more than 8 points, majored him. And he goes, I just felt physically stronger. He goes, I've never done that. He goes, I usually, would take the last 3 weeks off, sectionals, regionals, states, and everything. He goes, train all the way through, made a huge difference. He goes, I felt dominant at the state championship, and it showed.
You've got me looking now because I have plenty of notes in here on this. I listened to you talk with Dave Tate on Table Talk, and that's like the marquee of strength and conditioning podcast in my mind. It doesn't get better than Dave and the guests he has. But you started talking about that peaking model. Do you think sometimes a peaking model is not utilized enough in high school athletics?
Yeah, most coaches don't have an understanding of it. They think they do, and I've talked to a few good sport coaches who understand that. My swim coach is very good. We could talk about Masso, macrocycles, and everything with him. But they just sometimes don't realize, and they're just like, well, just lift them lighter. Or can we just lift lighter? Can we just do this? I said, there's a rationale to it. So I just had to, calmly explain to them and get them, again, to buy into what I was doing with those kids to get them in peak condition. And then when they saw results, then the coaches, holy cow, like this kid. And mostly when the kids say, I felt better, I performed better, the kids are like running faster. They're doing better at the end. That's a big buy-in because the kids say that to the coach sees that, and that's how you build up a strength program from that side.
Now, a peaking model may not be exactly perfect for a kid that's on the bubble, making it to state or what the case may be. So you may have to drop the calendar back. But I know nobody had told me any different when I had started this, and I had a wrestler in, and I was just starting to do this. I took a powerlifting peak cycle, and I manipulated a little bit. I'm like, well, you just want to see if this works? I mean, we were throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it stuck. But that peaking model did work, and once that happened, I was sold on its effect.
Yeah, honestly, that's where it comes from, is my powerlifting background, my strength conditioning background. It's nothing more than bring the kids up when they need to, resting them a little bit, and get them ready to go. But a big thing I think I do is of the mental side, because I'm like, hey, look what number you hit. Hey, how much easier was that than, before? Hey, look how much stronger you are at the end of the season. I put a better product on the mat or on the field or on the track for the coaches at the end of the season, where I hate it when people say, oh, we just want to maintain. I go, maintain. I said, a tree is either growing or dying. A business is either growing or dying. I want to get them a little bit better for you. I want them to be a little bit stronger, a little bit mentally better. That way those kids shake their head like, yeah, I feel better. Like, wow, I can't believe I hit that. Or, man, I'm still hitting these numbers pretty good at the end of the season. I feel good, coach. When you have that, those kids are going to go out there and perform even better.
Even when you get deep into the Bondarchuk system, which is a peaking-based system, they talk about in there how hard the maintenance cycle is. That's why they're trying to get so accurate on when an athlete peaks, because, yes, maintenance is way more difficult than what you think.
Yep. Yeah, because you're dealing with injuries with kids. This comes up. Hey, we got to do this instead over here. Hey, coach, this happened over the weekend. Hey, I twisted my knee. Hey, I got thrown on my shoulder if they're a wrestler. My football guy is something like that too. So you're always working around a little bit of stuff. That's why it's important on a strength side to even have a staff a little bit. So I can trust some guys that, hey, go work with these guys. I'm going to get this group started, because we only have X amount of time in a high school setting versus a private setting.
The curveball would be the weight in wrestlers. So you've got to somehow manage the weight while you're managing the peaking cycle. Do you ever run into an issue there, or the guys that you have are at a level where the weight's not an issue?
You're talking about weight cut or the weights being used?
Weight cut.
Yeah. It's always going to be a factor, especially my guys that are cutting down and they think it's a better thing. So, I mean, they come in, they're 10 pounds over on Monday and Tuesday. So that's why I said we get a lot of our big lifts in with those guys. So yeah, it does come down to a factor. If you look at wrestlers, I think they lose the most muscle mass during the season of any other sport, just because of the weight fluctuations, the yo-yo dieting all the time. So I try to keep as much muscle mass on as possible with those guys. Same thing. I just had a guy at the Olympic trials, which was really cool to go out and be a part of. A Greco-Roman wrestler. We didn't quite make the Olympic team, hit our goals, but he did a phenomenal job for me all year. And it was the same thing. Like when he was starting to cut weight, I had to work with his nutritionist, and we had to talk about what I was doing, what they were doing. And it was a fine line between too many reps and not enough, and what RPE I was going to use with him. That was just him and I talking several times a week, just how he's doing, how he's feeling. I wanted him to carb up, have a little bit, more in his muscles available for when his workouts were. I had to work with his nutritionist to explain a little bit on that. So we came to a pretty good conclusion. He did, very well out there, just missed making the Olympic team. but he's going to come back, and we're going to compete for world team spots here in the next year.
In that podcast I had listened to, you hit on some things that I've been putting a lot of stock in, and I just want to make sure I'm heading down the right path, especially for female wrestlers. And I know I've talked about this on the podcast with other guests, but the benefit of sleds, and then you got deep into sleds on an incline. So utilizing sleds and chains and different things for dragging purposes.
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect and create a better wrestler in your opinion?
The younger wrestlers, I mean, those are so simple exercises that really don't take much teaching, or you really can't screw up. I think they build up the sled pushes and pulls. They build up the hips and legs tremendously. With a younger athlete, there's not hardly much spinal compression on there. There's not much teaching. There's not much of a learning curve. Here, push the sled, get in a good position, drive your feet. We can get going. Hey, if you're pulling it backwards, you got a belt on, working your quads with everything. Hey, just step back into it. It's very easy to teach. You can load it up extremely well. You're going to get strength and conditioning. You're going to physically fit instead of making a kid just run. Now I'm going to get the kid stronger, and I'm going to get them in condition at the same time. So during the season, I really don't use much of that stuff. In my off season, if they're not wrestling a lot, or hey, coach, I'm 8 weeks out from Super 32s, or the Ironman or something big, then I'll start putting that stuff in just because they're not wrestling a lot. And I can do a little bit more conditioning for them. But I think that stuff is very important just because it's so easy to teach. It's so easy to get done. I mean, if you push and pull a sled for a good 10, 15 minutes, you are done. Like there's nothing else coming back from that until you lay it in the grass and your heart rate, actually comes back down. But I utilize a lot of that, a lot for my younger lifters. And then my older ones, like I said, mostly in the off season with everything on there, but it just builds up such a tremendous base all around. And like I tell everyone else, like when I tell my athletes, like, how long does it take you to get in shape if you've been working out? They go, I can get in, football shape or wrestling shape within, they don't even say a month. They sometimes say weeks, and I'm in pretty good shape. I said, great. How long does it take you to get strong enough to play in the varsity? They go, oh, coach, like at least 2 or 3 years. I said, so what's the most important thing we should be focusing on? The strength side. That's what you just said right there. We can get you in shape real easy. The strength side is going to take years and years to build up to get you to that varsity level.
I have some new projects working, so that led me down a road of doing some rucking. And I got Josh Bryant's book, and I was reading through it. So I started adding a weight vest and started adding the plate. And the more I do that, the more I think that would have huge carryover for a lot of your athletes that have to go an extended period of time in whatever their event may be, whether that may be a miler, a wrestler, things like that. As far as conditioning goes, do you do much in the way of that? Weight vests, dragon chains for an extended period of time?
I haven't done that for an extended period of time. I did have a couple athletes within my endurance that I would do that, and I picked that up from Louis Simmons. Louis Simmons would train a lot of triathletes down at Westside Barbell, and he would have several of them using weight vests along with just a sled with just a 45-pound plate. And he had a couple of them that were really good as far as ranked in the world that were just trained down there, triathletes. And he had one lady I remember talking about, and she ended up placing very well nationally and in the world. And he had her dragging a sled she couldn't even do like 15 minutes, just walking with a weight vest and a sled and a 45-pound plate on. He built her up to 45 minutes where she could continuously walk like that. And she told me, admittedly, she goes, my hips feel better, my knees feel better. She goes, my posture feels better at the end of a race when I would usually just die out because of strength. So she goes, if you had to ask me one thing I've changed, she goes, it was able to do that with her GPP work. And that was a tremendous thing. So I haven't done too much of that with my endurance athletes because I only get so amount of time if I was in a high school setting. With my other athletes, again, I focus because they're already doing so much conditioning, especially my running ones, that I would just focus on just the basics of strength training during that. But if I had more people like that, then I would definitely adopt something like how Louis trained them because I saw the results firsthand.
It seems like it's a huge builder for the erectors and the traps, and those are staying in an isolated state while you're walking. So I didn't know what kind of carryover you thought it might have for some of those athletes.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing. Like I said, I saw it firsthand. It's just something I guess with my time constraints, I just haven't been able to utilize or really experiment more with on that side.
Now, I listened to you talking there, and this is something that I've been tinkering with a little bit too. So why I have you on, I can actually ask the question and get an answer that I can work with. But you talked about in there that you moved I don't know if you use VBT or percentages, but either way, it wouldn't matter. You moved your dynamic days up to a heavier weight.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you go to as far as a percentage on that, and what made you do that?
Yeah, I just looked at it. I was very heavily influenced by the powerlifting side. Louis Simmons was a big one in the early 2000s when I got into it because I was from Cleveland, Ohio, and that's what was written about in Powerlifting USA. And I had a lot of their strength coaches quoting a lot of his stuff, so I got introduced to the conjugate system. Speed days and heavy days. And I just looked at when I got onto the world scene for powerlifting, This was 2003, make my first junior world team. And I got to actually see the foreigners competing, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the people from Finland, Japanese, Chinese, people from, Uzbekistan, you name it, all these different countries, Canada. So when I got to seeing what these lifters were actually doing and talking to their national team coaches, Team Germany, Team Norway, and unfortunately, I lost to a couple guys during that time. I took fourth at my first junior worlds. I medaled in the bench press, medaled in the deadlift, but took fourth in the all around, and I was very upset. And so I made myself, while everybody else was partying and doing stuff after, the banquet, I sat down with a lot of these national team coaches and the guys that had beaten me and some of the world team guys, and I was asking about their programs. What were they doing? How were they training? This is my first worlds I've ever been around, world level people. So I got to see some of their programs and how they were doing it. And a lot of our foreigners were doing high volume, high frequency training at that time on the junior world team level. So they were practicing the lifts a lot more with everything. So I was able to have a couple coaches send me over, back then, Microsoft Excel sheets. A couple of them gave me some forums to go on back then. And so we're looking at their style of training, how they were doing it. So it got me thinking of what I needed to improve on with mine, because their technique was phenomenal. And when you're practicing multiple times benching, multiple times squatting, multiple times deadlifting, you're getting that much more practice in with it. So then I just kind of started thinking maybe some stuff I was missing with, primarily the Louis system. And then I talked with other great powerlifters, Vincenello, who's the first guy to deadlift over 800, weighing under 200 pounds in the history of powerlifting. Vince and I, while he ran his own system, I learned a lot from him. When I started being on the junior world team, I started making friends with some of the open guys, some of the older powerlifters who'd been in it. They were showing me how they were training, whether it was a Chico-based system, again, with high volume, high repetitions, the main lifts, or some were still doing a conjugate, or some were doing a modified of each. So I kept plugging away what I thought was missing during that time. And that's how I slowly kind of developed my own philosophy. The coach from Norway, Detmar Wolf, ended up becoming a great friend of mine. He's actually the national team coach for Team Germany right now. He would send me some of his Norwegian program and how they did stuff. And it was a little bit where, they really weren't using much speed, much conjugate. And so I said, let me start experimenting with this. So I kind of got away from it on my own. And some of my other lifts started taking up because I was practicing more percentage based. And I noticed I got way better with the technique. I got stronger all the way around. But when I started taking some of my assistance work away, I didn't feel quite as stable. I started getting a little bit more injury prone. So I had to find a balance of Louis' system where you're working assistance exercise to build stuff up, but also high volume where I'm still practicing the lifts. So I guess that's where I developed my philosophy and started taking the dynamic day away. And our lifts started going up. I started seeing better improvements with our technique. So that's how I developed that system on my own.
The benefit of the heavy dynamic day that I've noticed in the last few lifts that I've done here is your technique has to be way better or you're not going to get through it. Is that something you noticed? Your technique had to get better for the weights you were handling. You couldn't slop through it because the percentages were so low.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's one problem with the Chico system. You're only training maybe 80%. You don't dabble in the 90% range very often. And I personally believe anything 90% and above, if you're looking at Prilipin's chart at all, I think it is almost its own training system, because you can only do it for so long, especially being a drug-free athlete. And you can only do it for so many sets, so many reps before you start breaking down over time. I'll give you an example. I got my Jared Martin right now, who's the first man in history to squat 1,003 pounds at 275-pound body weight. He did it in single ply gear, so he holds the raw world record squat of 866 pounds, and he holds the 1,003 in single ply in USA Powerlifting, which is the highest by a drug-free athlete ever in the history in the 275-pound class. I can only dabble in 90% of his lifts for so long before it will start to break him down and cause some serious stuff. So I have to play around with, when I can get some heavy weights on his back and when I can't. And it's just a delicate thing where I talk with him back and forth. I've had him for over 10 years. I've had him since his first 600-pound squat to now his 1,003-pound squat. But we've been able to dabble in that, work with that with him. And again, it's talking to my athletes, seeing what he can handle, what he can't, because he's a high volume guy. But at the same time, he can't be doing high volume with high intensity. It doesn't work like that. You will beat yourself up too much.
Now, you just brought something up in there, and I was taking a note on it. But a guy like that, his training age is so high that 90% is going to hit him way different than 90% is going to hit your high school athlete.
Oh, yeah. They could do 90% several times a week. I could do German volume training, 10 sets of 10. They're going to get stronger. Yeah, absolutely. Way different. Yeah.
It's sometimes, I think we read that stuff, and they're like, and we're trying to figure it out in our minds, but we're not at the level that what you just said makes sense, because we're not firing enough of our muscles, and we're not getting beat up the same way. Now, obviously, the higher your training age, the more that has to take into effect. But your average kid that you're working with, they're not going to see it like he is.
Yeah. the average high school kid I'm working with, I like 5 reps with those kids because it's not, especially on main lifts, it's not conditioning. If you're doing 8 to 10, they just get worried about finishing the lift. If you start doing below that, they'll start missing. Right around 5 reps or so, that's enough where it's a little bit of conditioning, but it's a little bit where they still have to get the sets and reps. And I believe with the younger kids is high volume. These kids can take so much. They are recovery machines. I'm like, you're not beat up? He goes, no, I feel pretty good. And I'm like, dude, we just did this. He goes, why? Can we do this again? I go, no. Like, well, wait, you got 2 more days till we're doing upper body again. But they are just recovery machines. And those kids just need sets and reps, and they need to be coached. Probably the highest compliment I get is when my kids move on to like a college, whether it's a good Division II school like University of Indianapolis, or if they're moving on to a higher Division I school. My kids, I had a couple swimmers, we're talking about that at Purdue. Within 2 days, they said, you can just go lift with the varsity. Like, you don't need to be in the freshman basics class over here. I just talked with the Indiana University coach. He's a good friend of mine. I had a kid go down there before, and same thing, that he's like, within a week or so, the strength coach is like, hey, you don't need to be in freshman fundamentals for lifting. Like, we can set you up with the varsity. You know what you're doing down here. And so it really goes back to that technical side. Yeah.
And that is a wonderful compliment, not only to you, but the program, and the kids see that, they hear about it because they all keep in touch. And there's more buy-in at your level because the kids that just went on to college said, hey, he's got us on the right track.
Yep, absolutely. Same thing for my lifters. I've had a couple that have gone, there's very few colleges that offer full rides. And like we were just talking about for powerlifting, and when they get there, my kids are technically sound. Where again, a lot of the coaches, they come from programs where the kids are maybe, kind of freak athletes or strength, they had a background or genetics. My kids come in technically sound, and they're like, hey, we don't really have to teach them the basics. Like, they're good to go. We can get these kids on program and get them ready to win a national championship.
The podcast I listened to, you brought this up, and I know I've talked to other people about it a little bit more privately so than on the podcast, but be willing to get your guys up kind of heavy to see where the mini max is. Yep. Will you take your guys up close to failure or even failure just to see where the weak spots are so you can start improving?
Yeah, I mean, that goes with anything I do. I was just giving a seminar here at Davenport University this week. I'm sitting in my hotel room right now. Same thing I told them, you guys got to work above 80%. I'll be able to see stuff with 135 and maybe 225 on the bar, but nothing really sticks out when you get above that 80, 90%, start playing with a little bit of fire. That's when, like, hey, you lose your arch. Hey, you're losing this technique. Hey, you're letting your shoulders roll. Hey, you're not keeping your brace when you're lifting over here. Hey, you're letting the bar and your shoulders drift forward on your deadlifts on that side. So, yeah, I'm a big believer with that. My kids, if we're doing, let's say, a simple 5x5 routine, I will have them work up. Hey, your speed looked good on that. Let's do a couple workup sets over here. Hey, remember what I told you about earlier? You see how it's applying now? Like, oh yeah, I really need to fix that up. I really need to tighten up. So I might have them redo a set. I might say, hey, we're going to put another 5 pounds on. You got to fix it. And that will make those kids focus on that technique. Because it's like, oh, we just went up in weight. Man, I better do this a lot better. And that's how you teach the kids as you're going through.
You touched on it there a minute ago, and I had quite a few notes on there, but about this. But as you've taken this to the next level in your own training, you had to find a new level of discipline. You had to keep making the adjustments to compete at the level you were at. How have you taken that knowledge back to your athletes?
I tell them all the time, like, you guys get to learn from all my mistakes. You get to learn from all my resources, who I still count on, very good. I talk to Ed Cohen probably every 3 or 4 weeks when I have questions about some of my athletes, or especially my high-end lifters, about, hey, here's what I'm running into. What are your thoughts on this? And Ed always takes my call, gives me a call back. We always discuss that. So, yeah, it was a big part of learning that. I refer that back to him, like, hey, this is some mistakes I made. I had a lifter. They were asking about, hey, coach, I'm seeing a lot of, now they made a world team. They're like, hey, some of these guys are benching, 3 or 4 times a week I'm talking to. I'm like, yeah, but look at their shoulders and look at their careers. I'm like, those guys won't be around for a very long time. There's a few that can last like that. But if you look at like some of the high volume, high frequency stuff like that, and like they're not building up their assistance work. And some of those lifters, they shoot right up real quick and then they disappear because they get injured or they stall out, or, all the above end up happening. They get injured and stall out. So I just bring my lifters up slowly. I explain to them about, my style of training versus some of the other stuff. Sometimes I let them make a little bit of mistakes on their own. Nothing's going to cost them, but stuff I can say, hey, remember what we talked about? This is some of the reason why. They're like, okay, I understand what you're saying now. Or, hey, like when you talk about long-term development, it's the same thing. Hey, look at where you are long-term. I just had Shelby Morse, who was competing at the USA Powerlifting Raw Nationals last weekend in Salt Lake City. She ended up taking 4th place out there. It's the highest place we've ever been. She set the all-time American bench press record. And she was looking around. She goes, none of these girls I remember from years ago. She goes, you always told me that I would outlast every one of my competitors. And she goes, some of them are newer that are behind me. Some I remember, but she goes, most of them either dropped out from injury or, from, just burnout, or, they just couldn't make any more progress. So they just said, you know what, I've tried and tried and tried. This didn't work. And she's still on my, roster after 10 years. I had her since she was 14. She's almost 25 now. And, we're still placing the open and looking to do some great stuff.
You touched on it there, and I wrote it down here because maybe a lot of us are in this boat, but obviously you competed at the highest in the world, so this isn't going to come into effect as quick for you as it would for a guy like me. But getting your athletes better than you were, it's tough because you may not have learned what you needed to learn to get yourself better, so now you have to teach athletes to get better than you. How do you dig in and find that information so that you can take them to the next level that maybe somebody like me missed on?
Yeah, as far as taking them to the next level, it's a big part is getting them to believe when they're younger. If you're talking about a younger athlete, just getting them slow wins, getting them medals. If there's a state record ever they can achieve, just getting them slowly to buy in and just, hey, this is the new stuff, or hey, coach, I read this, or hey, I saw this now that I'm getting into it more. So I think it's really just a buy in over time. But it's a level of commitment. Like I have a high level of commitment, and it's not for everybody, especially if you want to be, for powerlifting. I have some people, they come in, they're personal training clients, they just want to lose weight, look better. I mean, that's fine. But when I get a serious athlete, like I tell them about the serious stuff, like you have to sacrifice the average life of what you need to do. I got a girl right now, she's at Marion University in Indianapolis. She's All-American for me in high jump, took fourth at the Collegiate Nationals as a true freshman. She comes down and drives an hour sometimes once or twice a week to just come in and work out with me lifting wise, because she knows the benefits. And when her jumps are at her highest, that's when she's at her very best. So I think it's a buy-in. And she saw when her strength dipped a little bit during the season, when she wasn't able to make it down, her jumps went down. And she knew she had to come in. I had a couple of volleyball players, the same thing. They didn't feel quite as good on the court. So they were coming in, even dead tired after practice. Hey, we got to get something in. We got to keep your strength up as much as we can. But again, I also said, hey, we got to look into proper supplements for you now. Hey, we need to look at some other stuff. Like you're at a whole nother level. I tell my high school kids that are going on to college, like, hey, you got a college that's paying for you to go there now. You have to redefine yourself. You're no longer this high school athlete. You are a paid athlete, whether you want to look at it or not, and you have to step it up to a higher level. I got two kids wrestling at the University of Iowa, Victor Voinovich and Kale Voinovich. Their dad was actually my coach. I don't write their strength training programs up completely, but we talk about, hey, this is what you need to do on this end. Hey, what's your diet like? Hey, what's your supplements like? So it's just getting them like, hey, here's the next part in this. Hey, here's the next part in this. Hey, this is why this isn't working well. You got to redo this. You have a good diet. You don't have a great diet yet. And that's how I get them to buy in. And that's how I get them to show them like, hey, this is a whole new thing that you got to start mastering now.
There's always a new level to achieve. It's never you've reached a pinnacle and there's nowhere to go. There's always more you can do. It may not be in the weight room, but somewhere there's always more you can do.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
You can't cheat the calendar. Don't take the good days overboard, and don't punish yourself too bad for the bad days. Is that, I think I heard you say that, and it made a lot of sense to me. If this is a lifetime pursuit or any long-term pursuit, you have to keep everything in check. How are you able to get your athletes to do that?
One thing I go first is sometimes, I hate to say it, but it's got to be said. You have to get the next best thing. If we're talking about the weight room, you didn't quite hit your numbers that day, well, then you got to get the next best thing. Hey, let's go heavier on your assistance work than normal. Hey, I'm not going to keep working up. It's just not there today. Let's go ahead and cut this off before, something good or bad happens, especially a high-end athlete. But let's go heavier on this other stuff. Hey, if we're not getting the gold, unfortunately it's not there, then you better come back and get silver or bronze on, wherever we're at. So I was talking about, hey, it's the next best thing. Hey, let's go heavier on this. Hey, what did you need to look back? You need to look back on your training logs. Like, how was your sleep lately? How was your food intake lately? Hey, coach, my calories were down. Hey, a lot of stress going on with everything. I'm like, all right, what do we need to do to eliminate that? What do we need to do to take it out? And so my high-end lifters, that's something I'm good about doing is how can we fix this? What do we need to do here? Look at your lifestyle to change this to get the results that you wanted. So I think my philosophy is, you hate to say it, but it's got to be brought up. Hey, let's get the next best thing. What else can we work on? Hey, we can drop down. We can work on some of your speed a little bit. Hey, we can work on your technique a little bit here with some lighter weights. Hey, the heavy weights aren't there today, so let's rechange. Let's do our focus. Jared Martin, just the other day, he's actually sitting in the room with me over here. We had a good deadlift. He worked up to 804. It was something I wanted to push him on his deadlift a little bit right now because he has the Worlds coming up in November. But we were supposed to do like some other stuff afterwards. No, I said, your bottom position just isn't where I want it. So we're not doing RDLs. We're not doing any of this other fancy stuff. You need to work on pause deadlifts today. I'm going to have you pause, work on the bottom position. So we got about 3 or 4 more sets in with that with moderate weight. Worked up to 804. I think we're working up over 600 on that part. He was a little bit beat up. That 804 took a lot out of him mentally and physically. But again, hey, what's the next best thing? Hey, we need to still work on the bottom position up here. So we're going to bring the barbell up just 1 inch off the ground. I'm going to make you hold it. We're going to work on bringing your chest and hips through when you're going through the lift. So Jared and I got that down. And again, he goes, hey, I'm feeling a little bit better. Hey, every week we're making a little bit better changes. And that's how I modify and help my athletes based on what I see.
The thing that ties into that, I guess, would be emotion. And emotion's like balancing a broomstick on your finger. If you move it any, you get a big change at the top. So keeping your athletes locked in mentally, emotionally, where the job's the job and they're looking straight ahead. What practices do you use to help them with that?
Yeah, with my more experienced athletes, ones that are making world teams and winning nationals and powerlifting with everything, that just comes to me talking to them. I call and check on them more often than normal. You know, if I'm driving 20 or 30 minutes, they always joke around like, "Hey, coach, you driving right now?" I said, "Yeah, let's call in, let's check in, let's see how everything's going." So we stay in constant communication with that. I think my younger athletes, it's just a matter of getting them to buy in and dangling that carrot out in front of them. Hey, look how much you improved. Hey, do you remember where you were at before? Hey, do you remember how much you're looking better now with everything? Hey, how's stuff on the track going? Hey, how's your speed going? Hey, remember how your squat went up and now your high jumps going up on their part. My hurdlers, when they came in, I had a couple university guys that were doing very well, top 15 in the nation in the hurdles, Sam Barnett and a few others from the local college. And I'm like, "Hey, coach, like my knees aren't built, they're not banged up as much as some of the other hurdlers right now. They're still, in pain a little bit." But he goes, "I'm not having to ice down my knees like everybody else on the team. I'm a little bit better than what I see." He goes, "This is really cool." He goes, "I used to be in the trainer's room every day." He goes, "Now I can just, take a little bit of ibuprofen, maybe ice a little bit, and, I'm good to go compared to some of my other athletes." So I think it's just constantly reminding them about stuff. And my high-end athletes just constantly checking in and knowing that, hey, we're on the same page. We're both, trying to win this national title, trying to make this Olympic team, trying to, just do our best.
It seems like high-level athletes, good athletes, they're really open and communicate well about what's going on in their body and what they're feeling. You've spent a lot of time in the high school sector, so a lot of those kids don't have body awareness. They can't tell you what's going on. How do you work through that communication and help them where maybe they can start communicating or they can start feeling it in their own selves?
If you want to talk about, you talking about more of the high school kids on that part?
Yeah.
I just would at least, I want my kids at least, because there were some times in my weightlifting class that have 80 kids in there at one time. So, it was me and maybe I had another PE teacher to help me out or an assistant or something that, my interns. From them was just communicating a little bit. Hey guys, this is what's going on with this part. I try to give them a lot of visuals, try to do a lot of stuff on the whiteboard so these kids would kind of have an understanding. And I would remind the older kids to talk to the younger kids about this. I'm like, hey, think about when you first entered. You had no clue what was going on. So I think it's just communicating as much as I can. But again, you can't over communicate because it goes way over their head. So you just have to give them just enough so they have an understanding. And then some of those kids are going to have the ones that naturally gravitate towards you. Some of the kids you got to pull along, and some of the kids that are there, unfortunately, just be part of the team. But I think I just always try to do my best in a large group setting to at least communicate the goal of the day. What we were trying to do here? What was the actual objective of the day for everybody? And then once I got them going, I would go around and try to do as best I could of a job with 80 some kids to, build a relationship, help them out, make some small adjustments in their technique, their programming. I think when the kids saw that, they say, hey, this guy's actually trying to help around. He's not just standing in the corner like some gym teacher or something.
You have access to some of the best lifters, some of the best strength conditioning coaches in the world, and they'll take your call. Some of us may not have that. So filling the holes in the training knowledge through other avenues, what have you found that's really helped you?
When I didn't have those avenues, I would just call them. I would call, communicate, and I would visit. Most people don't do that. Even when I tell some of my younger interns that, I'm like, hey, just call this guy up. Hey, go spend a day with this guy. Hey, go out there and actually spend some time, like actually do it. A lot of them won't do that stuff. So I think it was me that I just had to keep doing it. I'd call these guys up several times, leave some messages. I'd have other people call on my behalf. Hey, can you call this person? Hey, can you let them know that, so like I'd like to be in touch with them. And those people would contact them and said, hey, you're a friend of so-and-so, you're a friend of mine. What can I help you out with? What can I do on that part? So I think just really being communicative. I think asking other people. I had one of my best friends was on the world team with. She's the head sports dietitian at Mississippi State University. Shout out to Pam Bartz. She's a stud. She was national champion powerlifter, and she takes that whole mentality to the sports nutrition world. So when people ask me about dietetics or, registered work or, being a nutritionist, like or some strength coaches ask me about, hey, what, do you have anybody? I'm like, yeah. So I'll call Pam up and say, hey, can you take their call? Can you help them out a little bit? But then they have to call her after that. So I think on that part, it's asking around. If you had questions about stuff, you just let me know, and I'd be more than happy to reach out and pay it forward because so many people help me. I would be more than happy to help you or any other coach that had that avenue.
Meeting athletes where they are, and it may take a regression on the coach's part. That's something I'm trying to get better with as I move on into this. Is we want them all to be at a certain level because that's the fun level in our mind. But bringing our programming back, simplifying it, meeting the athlete where they're at. What does that look like to you?
About athletes or competitive lifters?
Athletes more so.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about the technical side, I think that's a big part because kids come in with bad habits into the weight room. So it's like, hey, here's where I'm showing you. Here's where you're at. Here's where you and I need to meet in the middle. This is what's going to be most efficient for you. Because I've had people that have come in. I'm like, hey, we're gonna have to start this all the way over. They're like, man, I don't want to lose 50 pounds off my bench press and learn how to do this. And so it's like, all right, here's some small changes I need you to make. And I explain to them about it and how it's going to benefit them. They go, oh, coach, my shoulder used to hurt me when I bench. Well, now it feels better. Hey, the way I used to squat before kind of hurt my back. I like the way you showed me, like, now it actually feels a little bit better. So there's my hook. There's my, dangle with the carrot in front of them. Like, hey, they feel better. Hey, they actually notice that a little bit. Hey, with my hurdlers and my jumpers, hey, I'm actually jumping a little bit higher now. I had a freak athlete, Jalen Norwood. She came in. She was a NAIA collegiate national champion in the triple jump. She worked out, but she never like really trained. And she came into my weight room for 2 summers plus the seasons as much as she could, and we put some horsepower behind her. And she already knew it was important. But then when she got done, her hamstrings didn't bother her at the end of the season like they used to, and she knew that she would lose a little bit of power. And she was already an All-American. But I gave her enough tools and enough strength behind her now where her hamstrings were great by the end of the season. She goes, hey, they don't feel like they're going to rip off or pull. She goes, hey, my power's there because she's healthier. And she goes, hey, I'm jumping even better now. So just that little buy-in, I feel a little bit better. Hey, I noticed my hamstrings didn't, she goes, it's always bothered me tremendously by the end of the season where I had to be very cautious and mentally careful about it. When I got her strong enough and she was able to lift some certain weights and do some certain things, to transfer on the track, and she goes out there and wins the NAIA national, collegiate title in the triple jump. So I think it's just a little bit buy-ins along the way. I feel better. This feels better. Hey, this doesn't hurt as much anymore. Hey, this little injury, this little nagging thing actually went away. And that's how I get them to get bought in.
I rotate a lot of lifts around, but the one that always stays in there in some variation is the deadlift. The deadlift in athletes, what do you see as the crossover? Why is that so effective in athletes?
Yeah, I think it's just building up the backside. I tell my athletes all the time, you see a lot of coaches, which is great, the collegiate level, a lot of them use Olympic lifts. And I do want my kids to have a good introduction to that, especially if they're going to like the University of Indianapolis. Steve Barrick, great strength coach. I mean, he could be at any Division I he wanted to, but I make sure like my athletes are prepared on that part. But at the same time, they are very weak in the posterior chain. So for our listeners, that's the entire backside, guys. That's calves, hamstrings, glutes, low back, mid back, everything. I talked to him. I said, what do you see, with older adults? What are they always pulling? What are they always hurting or complaining about? Their backs. I said, what do you see with some of our athletes, out? They're always kind of hurting their backs. They're sitting in the trainer's room with ice on it. So I taught them really about building stuff up. I'm like, guys, weak things break. What happens if you put a load of muscle and a suit of armor around that? You're going to have a less chance of hurting yourself on that part. And I've even had athletes that, their doctors have said, hey, had you not built your knees up or had you not built this up, this would have been a lot worse of an injury. So you're lucky that you had been strength trained on that part, and we only have this instead of what it could be on that side. So I think deadlifts are great. I think they're the foundation of everything. I mean, if you can't do a deadlift, you're not going to learn a lift lift. I'm sorry. Okay. If you can't even keep your body straight, like you and I were talking about body awareness with some of the younger kids, it's not going to transfer into anything else. I love sumo deadlifts. I think those are great for my athletes, especially building the hips and hamstrings and teaching them to actually sit back into the lift. At the same time, I do conventional work because I've had, my high jumpers, obviously they're an extension. Some of my javelin throwers that come in and stuff too. I mean, if you're not building that backside up, that's when stuff starts tweaking, stuff starts hurting, stuff by the end of the season. Instead of a better athlete, you got a more injured one. So it's like you got to build those up, build the suit of armor, and it's going to protect them even more. And again, that goes in with the buy-in too.
You had brought up in that podcast that I had listened to, an assistance work for the deadlift, and I had never really thought about this, was a safety squat bar on a low box, and that would help benefit the deadlift. How did you stumble onto that?
Yeah, I was working with Louis Simmons. Louis had pointed out some stuff to me that I needed to work on, and he was a big believer actually with low box squatting was great for the deadlift because more time under tension. And it was something with the barbell, the safety squat bar, it would naturally pull you forward, and you have to learn to keep your back position up. If you want to talk about like telling an athlete to keep their back up, put a safety squat bar on them, work up to something, heavy set of 5, it's going to pull them forward. And they're going to be like, whoa. And I'm like, remember how I told you to keep your back up? They're like, holy cow. And they'll focus on that more than ever. That's better than any other cue you can give an athlete is, I'm not going to hurt them, but it's going to pull them forward and they're going to get to a certain weight and they're going to start bowing over a little bit if they haven't done it. And they're going to learn to actually keep their back straight. So it was working with Louis. And I noticed when I went through a training cycle, I probably went through, Louis always talked about his pendulum waves. working up for 3 to 4 weeks, maybe on a particular exercise. I know he would switch max effort around. I like staying with max effort a little bit longer because I believe there's an adaptation period that you have working with that bar. So it was just one of those. I went through a training cycle with that and I learned to keep my back straighter. I learned to fight through fatigue and fight and struggle all the way up through a safety squat bar. I love the grind on that part. And slowly my deadlift started going up. And I was like, whoa, like I thought this was supposed to, I'm squatting here. Why is this doing this? And Louis is a big person saying the squat and deadlift muscles are the same. This was your particular weakness, was your upper back, your mid back area, along with hips and legs. So I'm squatting to a low box. But he goes, you had a lot of time under tension. He goes, you're more of a grinder. And he goes, this is going to help your deadlift even more. And then my deadlift started peaking up. So I would run safety squat bar on a low box, at least 3 inches below parallel, 4 inches below parallel sometimes, because I wanted that time under tension and grind. And that's how my deadlifts were. So it was a mental thing along with a physical thing because it got those muscles stronger than what I needed to. And then also when I started working with some of my lifters as well, Shelby Morse, she's my first female to pull 501. She pulled 501 raw on a stiff bar. She weighed around, 215, I think, at the time. And again, we do a lot of low box squatting in her off season, and that seems to help her deadlift with the time under tension too. So again, it helped me out. It helped a lot of my lifters, and I've always seen good results with it.
I was watching some of your Instagram videos, and we've talked about Louis a lot. But what I noticed on there was that you will change your lifting surfaces. You'll have foam under your feet. You'll have different foam on the box. What does changing the lifting surface do to help your athletes?
Yeah, I did that a little bit more. That'll teach them when they go to sink in to learn how to stay tight a little bit. Those are fun things in my off season. If I see something that can kind of help out, I got away from that a little bit more and stuck with more traditional stuff as of late. But with my lifters, sometimes when they're learning to stay tight or they're coming down too slow and then they're coming up in a not the best position I want them in, I've sometimes have put some stuff on there to slow the eccentric down so they learn to sit and stay tight. They're like, hey, when is this going to stop? I'm sitting in this cushion. I got to explode out from there. So again, that's more of like, I can cue you all I want, but sometimes until I make you do something or give you an apparatus that's going to force you to do that, that's going to be a better benefit so you understand what I'm actually trying to teach you on that part.
You got the benefit of working with Louis quite a bit. I think you said he used to come and pick you up from your friend's house because you didn't have a car when you were in college. So what was that like to get so much one-on-one time with him?
It was great. I drive down. He found out, saving all my gas money to drive down to Ohio State, stay on my friends' couches. And he's like, dude, he goes, after I'd been down there a little bit, and he goes, so you took your fall break out here and, from college, the last 5 days? I said, well, yeah, you said I could come down. You had more time to train. So I'm like, yeah, I'm down here. So he goes, just tell me where you're at. I'll come pick you up. And he'd pick me up and I'd go out to breakfast with him and his guys. And, we would go train and he would drop me off. He goes, just save your money, kid. I was, 20 years old at the time. It was great because he told me a lot of the mistakes that all the lifters made. He told me a lot of mistakes that he had personally made. He told me stuff that I needed to do at my current level and what I was going to do as we went on. There were several times where him and I just had, he called his GPP workouts, general physical preparation ones, where it's just him and me. We go in. He had to do extra shoulder work. He had some shoulder problems. We'd always drag sled and always did extra ab work. And he would talk to me beforehand. We trained very hard. There really wasn't too much talking around that. And then we'd sit down and talk for hours afterwards. And he would just explain stuff about it. A lot of it was mistakes and, hey, this is what you're going to see. This is what you need to do. This is what's for long-term development. And then we would talk about strength conditioning because I was also interested in training athletes too. So he talked to me a lot about fighters, the wrestlers that were training there, the UFC guys that were coming in at the time, even the older ones when the first UFCs were coming out. So I got to learn a lot about that. He invited me a lot when he had other coaches, around college level strength coaches when Joe Ken was down there. Some of the Russian national team coaches. He had like the Wales, South Wales, I think rugby team was staying down there at the local extended stay for a month. And he was just talking about different ways of training them, how to work with those guys, how to train those guys up correctly, how to identify weaknesses within sport or within guys. So it was just a constant learning experience, being around him. And when he saw how serious I was, and most importantly, when I started putting up good lifting numbers, he took more of an interest because I wasn't just a guy coming down for once or twice. I was coming down there as frequent as I could.
On that note, you had to break into an incredibly tough room. From all the things I've read, West Side versus the World, all that, the picture they painted. So as a young college student going into this really incredibly tough environment, how were you able to get in there and get the help you needed from those guys?
Yeah, it just took commitment. I mean, it was about the fifth time I came down there, and Louis saw that I was getting serious and I was getting pretty strong. So he'd invite me early on when like Chuck Vogenpohl, Mike Ruggieri, a lot of the old school West Side guys were training in the first group. So I was loading plates, working the monolift, putting bands on, helping those guys out. And I learned a lot just from watching them. And then the second group was the weaker group, me and some of the lighter weight people and, some of the females that were in there during that time. So then I would just train during that time and, they'd point out some stuff in between sets. I would stay around and talk with Louis as much as I could with everything. I think he just saw that I was taking actual high interest and I wasn't going to waste his time. Like I was actually going to do something with it and I was going to show back up with everything.
I know you're in a hotel room. I know you have other things to do today, probably traveling, getting home. So I'll kind of start wrapping this up. That way I don't keep you all morning. But reverse band work. I heard you talk about that a little bit. I heard you talk about it in the lockout and a deadlift, and I'm sure you use it in some other aspects of your training. What benefits do you get from a lightened method?
Yeah, for me personally, so I would deadlift, and I always have a priority list in my training right now. So if I might warm up with some squats, moderate to go, then I'll hit my heavy deadlifts, and then it's like, what's a priority on my list? And I used to do a lot of rack pulls, but those just tended to beat me up too much, and they only stopped working for a certain amount of time. So I got introduced to reverse bands. They'd always been around. Louis always talked about the light method for a very long time. His old bench press videos, you can look on YouTube and find it. But I needed something more that was specific to my deadlift. I need something a little bit more because a rack pull is still very different. Even a block pull is different. But since I pulled a slight round back deadlifters always have a very hard time locking out because you have to go back into, neutral posture extension a little bit. A flat back lifter, they will obviously have a very hard start, but then they will have an easier finish. So with the way I deadlifted, I had to work on my lockout and I had to work on where my mini max was, my sticking point, which is about mid thigh, right around there. So what I did with my reverse bands, and this is me talking with my coach Sherman at the time, Ledford, and also with Louis, is reverse band pulls. I need a lot of those. So I would squat moderate, deadlift, whatever my routine was for the day. But then my next priority was to hammer that lockout, my weak point. So I would set the reverse bands up to where they would give me just enough to where the barbell would actually come out of the bands the last 3 or 4 inches so I could actually feel and lock the weight out. Too many mistakes I see people making with reverse bands, if you look them up on the internet and YouTube, is they just lift for ego and they're like 150 pounds above their max and, the bands are still on the actual weight. No, I wanted the weight to come out. I probably only used about 35 to 50 pounds above my traditional max to overload the top end of my lifts. And I would have to, then I'll be honest, like my grip was shot, after deadlifting heavy and maybe a few sets of reverse bands. So I'd put straps on when I needed to because I was worried about overloading the lockout. Ed Cohn and I talked about that. With my technique the way it was, I had to get those muscles a lot stronger. So the reverse bands were always kind of my go-to in my training cycle. I would use those in the off season to maybe test and see where my deadlift was, or maybe to work them back in a little bit before a training cycle. But those would be used for definitely the last 5 to 7 weeks, and those really build up my lockout. They taught me about patience. Brad Gillingham, who was a great super heavyweight lifter of all time, he has the most 800-plus pound deadlifts in the history of powerlifting done in competitions at any weight. Brad was a big mentor for me at the time too. And, we always talked about overloading stuff and working the top end of your lifts with everything. So I really took that into heart as learning how to be patient, learning how to grind. Because before I had a couple hitches or a couple things where I'd, kind of get the weight up and I would lose a couple in a meet. So that taught me patience and it taught me learn to grind stuff out. I think the same thing with bench press too. You have some people use bench press shirts now. We use reverse bands on those too. I think it's also good for a little bit of heavier weight. But again, I want the people to actually bring the weight out. So if you're 35 to 50 pounds above your bench max, you're going to learn to set up tighter. So you can tell an athlete, hey, you got to get tighter on your setup. Hey, you need to lock in. Well, I'll tell you what, you give them 35 to 50 pounds above their max, they're going to learn to lock in a lot better. They're going to learn what it means to tighten up, or they're going to loosen up on there. So again, I'll have the bands on the bench press. Again, they'll probably come out the last 3 or so inches. So they learn to lock it out and they actually learn to handle the heavier weights on that part. So I think, it goes back to the technique number one on that part, handling the heavier weight, and then obviously overloading where you need to, which a lot of time is lockout on the deadlift, especially for a round back puller like me, or, the bench press, because if it can't get off your chest, it was just too heavy. Okay. Especially for a raw lifter. If you're losing halfway up, people are like, oh, I need to train triceps. And they go over there and do push downs and dumbbell stuff. I said, no, you need to overload it with heavier weights. And heavier weights is 35 to 50 pounds above your max minimum.
I listened to an interview with George Halbert, and he talked about bands extensively, and he was mentioning that, only he was talking about the other way, coming into heavier bands and slowly building it up. But you get the same effect. You're learning to handle more weight on your triceps in the lift you want. Yep.
George is good acquaintance of mine down there. I talked with him many times growing up. Recently talked to him right before Louis Simmons had passed away. I was down there about 2 months before that happened. George also said, he goes, hey, I use more band tension than anybody else. He goes, there's only been a couple other guys that could do the workouts I did and get the results on my end. He goes, I just noticed they've worked out a lot for me. But they did come with an issue. He had a lot of shoulder problems, but I mean, the guy was handling 700 plus pounds at 198 and 220. But they did come with a cost, later on at the end with all that added eccentric tension. But it's just something that always worked out for him, just like Chuck Loganpole, the bands obviously worked out for him and the way he squatted. Other people, it was just too much tension. For me, it was almost too much tension the opposite way. Doing some bands on some speed work, adding some extra tension in the off season, I think is very good because you'll learn to handle some heavier weights in your hands. Like, hey, your max is 200. Hey, this is 275 at the top with the bands. Obviously it's, a lot less when you get to your chest level. But again, I think it teaches you to learn to push through speed. Because I'll tell athletes, hey, we got bands on there now. Hey, we got chains on there now. If you don't push through this very fast, you will get stuck right in the middle. And they'll hit a heavy set and they'll get stuck right in the middle. I'm like, see, I told you. And they'll come back a lot of times, and especially a beginner with the bands or chains, and they'll learn to tighten up and they will learn to get speed off their chest or speed out of the hole of their squat. That way they don't get stuck. So again, it's giving them an apparatus and giving them a tool to actually teach them to learn how to lift very fast, or you're going to get stapled with these bands.
Have you found as your training age gets higher that the bands wreck you a little bit more going into your next lift, or is that just something I'm just noticing and it really doesn't have anything to do with anything?
Yeah, I'll put them in an off season with some of my lifters, for 3 or 4 week blocks. I've gotten away from them a little bit unless I see, hey, I want you to start handling some heavy weight. Hey, your technique's dipping on this stuff. Maybe just for some general variation too. Hey, we need to get some speed back in your lifts. Like we've been, kind of lifting very heavy, 1 rep maxes and stuff, before your meets, obviously at your meet too. So maybe if I want to get some speed back in, if I want some variation back in, just some mini bands that are on there. For my training age, definitely. I'll use some light mini bands on some stuff. I'll mostly use chains right now. But I will mix those in just for a little bit of variation. Again, a lot of my stuff, I'll be honest, I can improve so many lifts through so much technical stuff right now. Like Jared Martin, he's sitting over there making faces at me actually in the hotel room. With his stuff too, it's like I can fix his technique because he's very strong. If I can get him technically sound on his lifts, they're just going to go up. All right, there's obviously a lot more stuff we have to watch and do with volume and everything like that. But when Ed and I talk about that and converse about him, it's the same thing. If I can get him technically sound and sit back into a squat good and not use his shoulders on his bench press, the program almost takes care of itself because he's technically sound, he's using the right muscles, and he's not going to get injured.
Well, we've went on here for a while, and I know you just did a clinic in Davenport, and you're probably antsy to get home. You've got a friend with you, all the things that go along with that. I do want to take time to apologize. You give me your number. I typed one wrong number into my phone, and then that was a whole deal. And then I missed an email from you. That was a whole deal. I know I had to come off extremely unprofessional, but yet you still made time to do this, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this. And, with Zach and Ash being good friends with us and everything back and forth, like it's been a good thing. I had a great time at Davenport University. I love helping people out that are in it for the right stuff. And that coach that I did a clinic with yesterday, I mean, we went 3 hours nonstop just over lifts. Jared was, my assistant. I had another guy up there, Zach Barry, helped me out too, one of my other assistants. And I mean, we just rocked it. We helped so many people out with so many technical things, brought some stuff into it, talked to them about some different stuff. The coach was very open to understanding about that. We had great questions about the technical side, along with programming, how to incorporate other stuff. So when you get around people like that, an environment like that, it's you get good people and you see what they're trying to actually do to promote the sport and help out. You definitely want to be a part of it, because I was even helping people afterwards too that came and had some more questions, like between breaks. I'm like, hey, let's go to the weight room. Let's go figure this out. I'll help you out in between there. So people were just loving it. Got me charged up. I woke up early today, ready to get going on everything too. So it's a great feeling to help people and to be around people who are committed, like Coach Connor is over there at Davenport University. I think he's going to do great things. He just needs time, experience, and years to build that program up. But, hopefully he stays around and continues to do that, which I think he's going to do. And he's doing, most importantly, the right thing by kids and right thing by the sport.
Well, Coach, the time was great. I appreciate it. You have some wonderful stuff out there. If they don't maybe know who you are, they can dig into your stuff. You did a great podcast with Dave Tate. They can find that on Table Talk. And then there's some other information out there. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Yeah, no, thanks. I learned a lot just from speaking with you and how you're doing your program and stuff. So, again, it's great to be around other coaches, dedicated, understands, and is putting the time and commitment to make people better. So thank you as well.
All right, man. Well, have a great day.
All right, Coach. Thank you.